The night 3 towering Apache women cornered the cowboy who needed them most. Before we begin, comment your country so I know where the story is reaching. He found them at the edge of the storm. They were 3 figures moving through the rain, each step a statement. They filled the barn door as if it had been made for them. Elias Crow paused, blanket in his hands, and felt the room contract around the sudden presence of other lives. They asked for shelter. They did not beg. They asked with the measured voice of people who had learned to make the world do what they needed by quietly demanding it. Elias let them in. He closed the door on the weather and on the small, ordinary life he had been keeping with careful habits. In doing so, he closed the distance between solitude and responsibility. They called themselves sisters, and the word landed like a small, stubborn truth. The eldest moved with the gravity of someone who had carried problems for years. The middle sister had a readiness that hummed beneath her ribs. The youngest kept glancing at the rafters the way a child looks at a familiar sky, searching for patterns that made sense. Their clothes were simple and worn. Dresses that had seen sun and work sat at their shoulders, sleeves rolled, necklines open in practical modesty. The skirts were long but not bound. The hem shook off muck and clung to wet legs, revealing calves that were strong, thighs that moved like tools. Nothing about them was meant to attract. Everything about them spoke of function. They were dressed to survive, not to please. Elias moved through his house on instinct. He offered hay, a loaf, bread. Shelter is a contract, a trade. Tonight you sleep on my floor. Tomorrow you owe the world less. He watched them accept what he gave the way a man watches a storm pass. Understanding, wary, grateful. They worked as if they had always worked together. They tended the animals with the quick, efficient gestures of people who had spent years listening to the way a horse names its own pain. The eldest brushed down the stallion without fuss. The middle sister checked the harnesses and rethreaded a broken strap. The youngest hummed under her breath while she patched a tear in canvas. Their hands told stories Elias's voice could not yet coax out. At the heart of every good day is a small routine, and the barn that night became a map of tiny, exact motions. The hush of hands on straw, the scrape of a knife, the slow breathing of someone who was trying to persist. Elias watched the youngest pause over a book left on a shelf, fingers curling around the spine as if it were a relic. She opened it, read a line, and for the first time since they arrived, her shoulders unknotted. When he asked the simple questions people ask, the where, the why, they answered without names that matched any paper. They had reasons to be careful. The eldest kept her stare forward and gave the eldest answers. The middle sister answered with a half-laugh that kept edges sharp. The youngest, when asked, breathed out a detail about learning to read by lamplight before the run began. Their voices were anchored in memory and motion, and that made Elias listen. There was a thing in the corner of the barn that did not belong to them, a memory of violence in their hands, a bruise on the eldest forearm, a tear in fabric stitched in a hush. Elias noticed, but did not demand explanation. It is a dangerous kindness to pry. He held his space and let them decide when the story would be given. Night stretches when you wait. Once the barn settled into sleep, Elias stayed awake with questions he had not asked aloud. He thought of his own losses, the thin bed where old grief still lay, and felt new things forming like frost on the edges of memory. Protectiveness, curiosity, an odd, stubborn warmth that came from being needed. At dawn the land looked washed and smaller, as if a storm had polished all the sharp points away. The sisters moved in the pale light like people who had rehearsed escape and now tested the opposite, staying. They scoured the yard, tended the animals, and accepted Elias's small provisions with a dignity that made him sit straighter at the table. He offered work because he could not live with the idea of them leaving hungry. Fences need mending, he said. Cows need checking. Horses need tending. It was more than exchange. It was a way of saying, if you choose to stay, this place will be honest with you. They agreed to stay 3 days. The eldest said it plainly, like a fact. 3 was nothing, and 3 was enough to shift a life. The agreement held as both a promise and a test. In the quiet between chores, a curiosity stayed with him. Why would 3 grown women of such presence be traveling in a storm? What had they left behind? He put the question away like a wedge and went to work. Work settles the mind, and labor can be a safer confession than words. They told parts of the story in fragments. The eldest sometimes looked out toward the ridge and tightened her jaw, returning like a hand to a preformed notch. The middle sister spoke with an anger that had been tempered into iron. She would not let pity soften her. The youngest spoke in small, precise sentences about a life once ordinary that had imploded. These bits were enough. A suggestion of a wrong done, a family broken, a chase begun. There are places where power goes unchecked, and people absorb that violence until they learn to move in ways that make them invisible. Elias understood that pattern because he had lived near it. He had seen men with more money claim the land and take more than a share. He had seen fear bend people to a will. By the second night, they told him a name. It was not a quiet name. It hit the air like a stone in a tin cup and clinked with history. The name explained the pattern of fear. The name explained the long tread of being hunted. Elias felt the hairs along his arms rise as he heard it. Not because the name itself was new, but because the day had finally given him a face to the wind. They did not ask him to fight. They asked him to listen. The ask was smaller than a demand and heavier than a plea. In the hush after this, Elias realized his life had shifted on an axis of simple things. The barn, the bread, the obligation. On the third, morning a rider passed a ranch. Elias watched them as if they were weather. The rider slowed, glanced toward the barn, and then turned his horse away. The sisters watched too, eyes narrowing like someone reading a map. The middle sister spoke then, softly and with a sharpness that sat between pride and warning. They will come. That sentence changed every small plan they had made. The syllables did not call for violence, but they called for preparation. Elias set about what he could do. He checked the tools, he shifted feed, he bolstered hinges. The sisters moved with him, their bodies and hands learning this land in a single day as if time could be compressed by need. There was no boasting, no bluster. They talked through schedules, who would wake when, who would move what, who would be the one to distract a frightened colt. Theirs was a language of living people who measured danger in chores and odds and provisions. The barn became a careful choreography, each step chosen so that when the unknown knock came, they would already be in motion. That night, Elias sat up later than usual. He thought about his father and the rules his father had taught him. Never gamble on worst-case scenarios. Build small defenses. Trust the land's rhythm. He also thought about the ease with which a person can grow into a life of not asking questions. Sitting there, watching the three women rest, he felt his own small world tilt toward one he hadn't planned for, a household with company, with duties that meant more than keeping ghosts at bay. The youngest rolled onto her side and murmured a fragment of song he could not place. The middle sister mended a strap by the faint light spilling under the loft. The eldest watched the door. In the silence, Elias heard a promise in the way they breathed. Not a promise of permanence, but of a stand. There are choices that arrive not as epics, but as practical acts. To feed, to shelter, to keep awake when others sleep. Elias had lived a long time avoiding such choices by staying small, by pruning need from his life. Now he found himself extending his hand across the table, because some things are worth the risk. At midnight, he closed his eyes and held a single thought like a prayer. If the world will not keep the weak, then perhaps someone must. The sisters slept. The horses shifted in their stalls. Outside, the land was patient and ready. Inside Elias's chest, the steady cadence of decision began to replace the rhythm of solitude. The days that followed moved differently, as if the land itself understood that something had shifted. Elias found himself waking earlier, working longer, listening harder. The ranch felt fuller. The silence changed, shaped now by the presence of the three sisters who had stepped into his life without warning. The eldest rose before sunrise. She walked the perimeter of the property with long, even strides, her dress brushing against her calves as she checked gates and fence lines. She carried herself like someone trained by long years of watching and waiting. There was a steadiness to her presence, a quiet assurance that made even the horses turn their heads when she passed. The middle sister worked with a restless energy. She repaired tools, cleared debris, patched old boards, and lifted heavy feed sacks without hesitation. When she straightened, her dress caught at the thigh, showing the powerful muscles in her legs. She didn't seem to notice. Work was her way of keeping the past at bay. The youngest moved with gentle purpose. She helped Elias in the house, swept the floors, folded blankets, and read from his old books during breaks. When she stood in the doorway with sunlight on her skin and her skirts falling loosely around her legs, she looked like the kind of person who could rebuild anything, hope included. There was no rush to leave, though they kept their promise of 3 days. It was simply that 3 days passed, and so did a fourth and a fifth. Elias didn't call attention to it, and neither did they. By the 6th day, the sisters began to speak more honestly. They told him their real names. The eldest was Naya. Her name meant a woman who stands tall, and it fit her without exaggeration. She had long arms, broad shoulders, and a gaze that made people lower their voices. When she spoke, her words carried the weight of someone who had held together a family through storm after storm. The middle sister was Loa. Her name meant fire in motion. Elias understood immediately. She kept her thoughts sharp, her instincts quicker than most men he had known. Her dress fell off one shoulder when she worked, and her legs moved with fierce intention. There was nothing timid in her. The youngest was Sani. Her name meant the one who remembers. She carried stories in her voice and gentleness in her steps. Her calves were dusted with sand from morning walks, her hair loosely tied back, her dress tied at the waist with strips of fabric she had mended herself. Elias repeated their names until they sounded like they had always belonged to the land around him. They stayed because something in their eyes told him they had nowhere safe to go. And though they did not ask, they understood that Elias's ranch had become a kind of shelter, temporary or otherwise. The 7th day brought a change in the air. It began with a horse print in the dirt near the stream. Naya found it first and called Elias over. The print was deep, fresh, sunken on one side as if the rider had turned sharply. Elias crouched low, fingers brushing the damp soil. "That came from someone who wasn't passing through," he said. Naya didn't answer. Her silence said more than worry would have. That evening, they gathered in the barn after supper. The air smelled of fresh hay and dust. Elias sat on a wooden crate. Sani leaned against a post. Loa paced the floor with her hands on her hips, and Naya watched them all with a heavy, thoughtful look. Loa broke the silence first. "We can't keep pretending we're hidden," she said. "Someone found us. If they found us once, they'll find us again." Elias didn't disagree. He rested his elbows on his knees. "You told me their name," he said quietly. "You can tell me the rest, too." This time the sisters didn't exchange glances, didn't hesitate. The truth had grown heavy, and they were tired of holding the weight alone. Naya spoke. "There was a man," she said. "He controlled half the territory on the other side of the mountains. He wanted things he had no right to want. When our mother refused, he punished her. We ran before he could use that same hand on us." Loa added more, her voice tight. "He didn't expect us to escape. We were taller than most, stronger than most, but we were still young. He chased us out of the valley. We've been crossing land after land ever since." Sani's voice was softer. "He said no one would help us. He said people would believe whatever he told them." Elias felt a slow anger build inside him. Not fiery, not loud, the kind that settles deep and takes root. "You were right to run," he said, "and you were right to come here." Naya looked directly at him. "For how long?" she asked. "As long as you want," he answered. But the truth was this. Even as he said it, Elias knew the storm wouldn't wait for their decision. Danger had already begun its slow walk toward the ranch. The next morning confirmed it. Elias spotted a rider on a distant ridge, too far to see his face, close enough to confirm intention. The rider watched the ranch for a long time, then turned around and rode away. When Elias returned to the barn, Loa was already preparing. She tied her dress higher around her legs, so she could move easier. She packed what little the sisters owned into a bundle. She ran her hand along the back of the mare she had been training all week. Naya watched her. "We're not leaving yet," she said. Loa shook her head. "We shouldn't stay." Sani's voice trembled. "We can't run forever." Elias said nothing. He stood in the doorway, arms folded, waiting for their truth to settle. Naya eventually turned toward him. "You don't owe us anything," she said. Elias answered with a simple, steady tone. That's not how I was raised. People in trouble stay until trouble has passed. Loa looked at him with careful skepticism. Do you know how long that could be? Long as it takes. Sonny whispered something under her breath. Elias didn't catch it, but he saw the relief soften her shoulders. They stayed. The next 3 days moved slower than winter rain. Every task felt like preparation. Fences were checked twice. Animals kept close. The well was covered. Tools were repaired whether they needed it or not. During those days, small things carried weight. Naya, for the first time, allowed herself to smile. It was a quiet smile, but real. Elias caught it while she was rolling her skirts back down her calves after work. Loa argued with Elias over how to stack firewood. At the end, she laughed. A quick sound she cut short. As if surprised she still remembered how. Sonny read aloud from one of Elias's old books, her voice soft and careful, her legs tucked beneath her as her dress pulled around her knees. Those moments did not erase fear. They just made the coming danger feel smaller. On the 11th day, Sonny walked the stream and found a different sign. Boot prints. Not a rider. A man on foot. Someone who had been close. She returned quickly, breath thin. They're coming, she whispered. I know it. Elias didn't ask how. Some warnings are woven into the bones of people who have been hunted. That night the ranch was quiet. Too quiet. The horses paced. The wind stilled. The world seemed to lean inward. The sisters gathered in Elias's house, not in the barn. This time, the house felt like a place where truth could be spoken without echoing. Naya sat near the doorway. Loa stood by the table, sleeves rolled up. Sonny sat near the window with her hands clasped. Elias leaned against the wall, watching the three of them with a steady gaze. Naya spoke first. If we stay, we need to understand what happens next. They will stand at that door one day. They will call us out. They will try to drag us back. Loa's jaw tightened. I won't go with them. Not alive. Sonny closed her eyes. I don't want to run anymore. Elias crossed the room and stood beside them. You don't need to go anywhere, he said. You came here to survive. You don't owe that man anything. Naya looked at him long and hard. You say that now. But when he comes, what then? Elias answered with the quiet certainty of someone who meant every word. Then I answer the door. For the first time since arriving, all three sisters seemed to exhale at once. The room loosened. The air shifted. Something unspoken formed. A pact built not on promises, but on the simple truth that standing together was better than standing alone. Naya's voice softened. We will stay, she said. For now. And that was enough. The night deepened, and the ranch settled into uneasy rest. The world outside waited. The land held its breath, and the threat that had chased the sisters across mountains and valleys was drawing closer, step by step. The land always gives a warning before it changes. Sometimes it's a shift in wind. Sometimes it's the way the animals quiet. Sometimes it's the way a person wakes before dawn with a pressure in their chest, as if the world whispered something to their bones while they slept. On the morning their path finally reached Elias's ranch, the warning came in all three forms. The wind died. The horses stood still. And Elias woke before the sun, already on his feet. He stepped outside, boots crunching on dry soil, and saw Naya standing at the far fence line. She wasn't moving. Her dress brushed against her legs in the weak morning breeze. Her back was straight, and her breath was shallow. Elias followed her gaze. There, far down the ridge, barely visible in the drifting dust, were small shapes. Riders. Several of them. Not close enough to see clearly. Not far enough to pretend they weren't coming. Naya didn't turn when she spoke. They found us. It wasn't fear in her voice. It wasn't anger. It was acceptance. The kind that arrives only after you've been running long enough to know you cannot outrun everything. Loa joined them next. She walked with long, steady strides, her dress tied high around her legs, ready for work or danger. She squinted into the distance. Could be scouts, she said, or could be the ones who chased us from the valley. Sonny came last. Quiet as always. wrapped in a shawl, dress brushing lightly at her knees, legs bare to the calf. She clung to Loa's arm for a moment, then released it, standing tall despite the tremble in her breath. Elias looked at all three and felt a simple truth rise in him. They were tired, tired of hiding, tired of running, tired of carrying the memory of one man's cruelty. He spoke with a calm he had not known he possessed. "Come inside, all of you." They followed him into the house. The air was still. The space felt smaller with the weight of the moment. Elias sat at the table. The sisters sat around him. "This isn't a battle," he said. "Not today. No one needs to fight anyone. The only thing that matters is the truth you've carried, the truth of what he did." Loa's jaw tightened. "Truth didn't save us the first time." "No," Elias said, "but truth didn't have a home back then. Now it does." Naya leaned back, hands clasped. "What do you mean?" Elias folded his arms. "You told me he claimed no one would help you, that people would believe anything he said, that he held land, money, influence. Maybe he still thinks that's enough." "It usually is," Loa muttered. "Not this time." Elias said, "He ran you out of your home. He took your mother's life. He tried to take yours. You came here with nothing but your names and your strength. My land is yours now. You are not alone." Sani's throat tightened. "Do you really believe that will matter?" "Yes," Elias said, "because a man like him survives on silence, on fear, on people keeping their heads down. But people here talk. People listen. People have lived under men like him before. They're tired." Naya looked at him for a long time. "You're telling us to stay." "I'm telling you the truth," Elias answered. "Running won't save you, but standing will." The sisters exchanged glances. For the first time since the night they arrived, Loa nodded without hesitation. "We stay." Sani followed. "So do I." Naya inhaled slowly. "If this ends badly—" "It won't," Elias said. She held his gaze. "And if it does, then we face it together." Naya closed her eyes for a moment and exhaled. Together, then. The riders reached the ranch by afternoon. They came slowly, not like men eager for violence, but like men carrying a message they did not want to deliver. They reined their horses at the gate and called out. Elias walked forward, the sisters behind him. Their clothing was the same as the day they arrived. Dresses worn but dignified, necklines loose, shoulders bare, legs marked by miles of travel. They stood taller than any of the riders, unbroken, unbowed. The leading rider nodded respectfully at Elias. "You Elias Crow?" "Yes." "We ain't here to cause trouble," the man said. "We just came to say the one you're worried about, the man who chased these women, isn't coming anymore." The ranch fell silent. Naya's brow furrowed. "What do you mean he's not coming?" The rider shifted uneasily. He left the territory. He had men with him, but the law caught up with him. Folks started speaking against him. Women he hurt. Families he ruined. His own people turned away from him. Sani swallowed. "You mean he's gone?" "Gone," the rider said. "And not just gone. Finished. He won't be troubling anyone again." The sisters stood frozen. Their breath came uneven. Their bodies seemed to release years of tension at once. Naya lowered her chin and closed her eyes. Loa covered her face and let out a sound halfway between relief and disbelief. Sani began to cry softly. The rider nodded at Elias. "We thought you ought to know. Word spread slow out here. Figured you deserved the news first." Elias nodded in return. "Thank you." The men turned their horses and rode off, leaving a slow cloud of dust behind them. As soon as they disappeared over the ridge, Loa dropped to a crouch, hands on her knees, laughing through her tears. "It's over," she said. "It's actually over." Sani knelt beside her, tears painting her cheeks. "We don't have to run anymore." Naya stepped forward, shoulders trembling, trying to hold herself together. Elias reached out, and she did not pull away. She placed her forehead against his shoulder and breathed in the scent of a place that had given her refuge. Elias wrapped an arm around her. "You're home," he said. "All of you." Naya's voice broke. We've never had one. You do now. The days that followed felt like a second spring, not because the land changed, but because the sisters changed within it. Naya took charge of the horses, working each day with a calm authority that made the animals trust her immediately. She rode the tall mare Elias had given her dress tied at the waist, her legs steady and sure. Loa became the force behind the ranch's repairs. She rebuilt the barn door, fixed the fencing, and organized supplies with an energy that transformed everything she touched. Sani turned the loft into a reading space. She filled the ranch with laughter again. She hummed while she cooked. She walked barefoot on warm soil and felt safe for the first time in years. Elias realized something quietly. He didn't feel alone anymore. He had lived long enough to know that people don't enter your life by mistake. Sometimes they arrive like storms. Sometimes like blessings. The sisters had arrived like both. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Naya approached him while he cleaned tack near the barn. "We want to stay," she said. Elias looked up. "You always could." "No," she said. "Not as guests. Not as shadows hiding from someone stronger. We want to stay as people who belong here. As women who build something. As family." Elias met her eyes, steady and certain. "Then stay." She nodded. "We will." Sani came next, smiling through her tears. "I want to teach," she said. "Children in town. Women here. Anyone who wants to learn to read." "You'll be good at it," Elias said. Loa approached last, leaning her elbows on the fence. "I want to run this ranch with you," she said. "If you'll have us." Elias chuckled. "You three already run half of it." Loa smirked. "You three already run half of it." Loa smirked. "Then we'll run all of it together." And that was that. There was no ceremony, no grand announcement. Just three sisters who chose a home and a man who chose them too. Not as burdens, not as mysteries, not as fugitives, but as the exact people they were. Stronger than the storms that chased them. Gentler than the world deserved. Giants in both body and spirit. They had run for so long that stopping felt like a miracle. They never ran again. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more Wild West tales filled with heart, hope, and second chances.